In the Persian Gulf, there is a small and isolated island. The island can be described by two words: quiet and peace. But the archaeologists investigated a structure here that proved that this place was not as peaceful in the past as it is today. Cannons and mortars dating back to the 1500s. Rooms designed for the storage of artilleries, explosives and cannonballs. Why was this fortress built here? Sometimes in the early 1500s, a Portuguese admiral named Albuquerque ordered his navy to go through the Persian Gulf and capture an island named Hormuz. This island was constantly monitored by the Muslims. It was an important trade center between the Middle East and India. But one day, the Muslims detect an unusual guest. The Portuguese were not here for business. Large amount of money and goods were exchanged between India, Middle East and East Africa over this island every day. And now the Portuguese were claiming it as their own. How would the Muslims react? The Muslims were furious and they started attacking the Portuguese ships the same night. But could the Muslims defeat the Portuguese in the long run? Portuguese were the pioneers of installing heavy guns on warships. They had greater firepower. The Muslims of this area were no match. An experienced admiral, a skillful statesman, Afonso Albuquerque had no equivalent in the Muslim world. For several years, he used a combination of tactics to turn the island into a vassal state of the Portuguese Empire. In the 1400s, the Portuguese had many conquests and trade posts all around Africa. And in the 1500s, they had reached India, the Far East, all the way to Japan, making themselves the largest empire in the world at that time. The Portuguese conquest increased the Islamic insurgencies in the area. To deter the insurgencies, they built this fortress in Hormuz. And although they had many Muslim allies in the area, they also had many enemies who wanted them out of the area. And that called for increased fortifications in the Persian Gulf. This is the remains of a Portuguese ship. It was stuck in the mud 450 years ago, and nobody even bothered doing something about it. The Portuguese were planning to capture and militarize this whole island. The capturing went well, the militarization not so well. For some reason, this ship is split into several parts, and it is the home to all types of marine species, and the playground for the fish and the dolphins. The Portuguese started building this fortress too little too late. They were already running out of time. This palace was built by the Safavid Empire of Persia in the 16th century. And inside, on the walls, there are several paintings. The painting behind me shows a battle between the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Empire in the August of 1514, and the Persians lose this war. The Ottoman Empire was the greatest threat to the existence of the Safavid Empire of Persia. As a result, the Safavid had to develop more advanced military equipments and tactics. Decade after decade, they became better and better at ground warfare. And this experience was not a good news for the European conquerors. The individual sitting in the middle of this image is Shah Abbas. His kingdom was the turn of the tides. Shah Abbas defeats the Ottoman Empire twice. Defeating this powerful empire was no small task. Feeling more confident in his military skills, he decides to visit the Portuguese in the south. But he knows that his navy is no match for the Portuguese. So he asked for a little assistance from the British, and the British agreed. In early May 1622, the British send their naval fleet, while the Persians send their ground forces, and the war begins. For 2 days, the English bombard the Portuguese ships, while the Persian ground forces overwhelm the Portuguese and their allies. And within a couple of days, it is all over. The Portuguese surrender and leave the island indefinitely, leaving behind this fortress that will be abandoned for the next 300 years. The 100-year-old ruling of the Portuguese in these waters is now officially over.